Damascus. Let's get right to NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel with the very latest on the ground in Damascus. Richard?
The pace of events here has just been staggering. We are now right in the center of Damascus. More than 1,000 people have come here. They've been coming all day to celebrate. They've been firing guns in the air. If you look down at the ground, you can see all of the bullet pieces. There's been a constant stream of celebratory gunfire. After more than 5 decades in power, the Assad family's dynasty has been overthrown. Bashar al-Assad, who'd been fighting a civil war in this country and winning a civil war largely for the last 10 years, was dramatically overthrown in just 10 days. People here are stunned. They're generally optimistic. Rebels who overthrew the government without putting up much of a fight. The rebels moved into Damascus and the armed forces just melted away, taking off their uniforms. The rebels are here being greeted like heroes. And we've been speaking to people who, some of them behind, are very happy today.
Happy, very happy, very happy, very happy, very happy.
Very happy. Why are you very happy?
Because لأنه نحن خلصنا من الخنزير، لأنه خلصنا من هالكلب، ما بعرف كيف.
He's saying in Arabic that the reason they are happy is they got rid of that pig. They got rid of Bashar al-Assad. What comes next in this country is a major challenge. Today is a new beginning for Syria.
Okay, Richard Engel, thank you so much for that reporting. Let's bring in NBC's Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. Also with us, MSNBC anchor Ayman Mohyeldin, who's reported extensively from Syria, and Douglas Oliphant, former National Security Council staffer under Presidents Bush and Obama. So, Kelly, bring us up to speed as far as the White House reaction, and also what do we know about the dozens of airstrikes the U.S. launched in Syria just yesterday?
Well, certainly for the United States, this is something that is being watched critically. The U.S. is involved, trying to bring about stability for especially U.S. allies in the region and trying to take measured steps because of the unknowns here, and there are considerable unknowns. President Biden met with national security advisors over the weekend, and he spoke publicly about this dramatic turn of events and the fact that the U.S. wants to be engaged and wants to be involved and intends to be so, calling this a great opportunity for the region. Here is part of what President Biden had to say.
The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country. It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty. We're clear-eyed about the fact that ISIS will try to take advantage of any vacuum to reestablish its capabilities and to create a safe haven. We will not let that happen.
And the president has limited time left in office, and at this point, President-elect Trump has talked about the U.S. not being involved in this, so there's already some space between the outgoing and the incoming administration on this. And certainly the U.S. is first concerned about force protection with about 900 U.S. service personnel in Syria, concerned about the risk of things like chemical weapons and the potential for valuable assets that could be volatile in the wrong hands. All of the uncertainties of when a long-held regime is toppled. Certainly, Israel has also taken aggressive steps to protect its border and to make strikes on some of the chemical weapons believed to be depots for those in Syria. So it's a time where the U.S. wants engagement, not knowing entirely who will rise in terms of leadership and what that will mean. But the U.S. position at this point is relief and glad that Assad and that long history has ended, uncertainty about what's to come.
So, Ayman, what do we know then about this rebel coalition led by ATS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, their leader, their ideology, who's backing it, et cetera?
So it's a coalition of groups, and the best way to kind of think of it is think about the evolution of these groups. You know, in 2011, when this Arab Spring started in Syria, it was mostly peaceful protesters that evolved into including defectors of the Syrian army. Well, over the course of the Russia crackdown and the Iran crackdown on these protesters, they became more militant, they became more jihadist, if you will. They became affiliated with groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and become extremists. So over the course of the past 10 years or so, they became designated by the United States, the United Nations, and others as a terrorist organization. The leader of this group right now, Abu Muhammad Julani, was somebody who, till this day, still has an FBI wanted poster and a $10 million bounty on his head. However, over the past several years, he has moderated his views and certainly moderated the way he spoke about the Syrian revolution. He distanced himself from al-Qaeda. He's even spoken candidly to a CNN interview just last week where he said he evolved, he made mistakes, and he is a different person than he was now, and he wants to build Syria into a pluralistic, multiracial, multi-ethnic society that is built on institutions, not on an individual. Of course, anybody who's watching this knows you cannot simply take that at its value, face value. You have to see what the actions are. And again, we're only 24 hours or so into this, but already one of the things that HTS has done that is different than other countries that have gone through Arab Spring is they have kind of already relinquished a little bit of power. They have created a caretaker government. They've appointed this morning or announced this morning a former minister to serve as the Salvation Prime Minister in this transition period. So it doesn't look like although they will be front and center in the power, they may not necessarily be front and center in the public face of that power.
Douglas, what stands out to me is as we look at the bigger picture in the region, a power vacuum on the day after. That's where things, of course, can so quickly be derailed in situations like this. I'm thinking of what happened in Iraq or Libya or Yemen. And so here we have all these sort of rebel factions that teamed up against Assad. They were united in who they were against, but can they unite to govern? What kind of challenge is that?
Well, that's the question, and it's a huge question, and we wish all the best things for the Syrian people, and we hope that there's a fairy tale ending to this story. But history would tell us to be much more cautious, from the Russian Revolution of 1917 to the groups of people who took Mosul with ISIS in 2014. It's usually the extremists who end up in charge, and it's usually the moderates who find themselves isolated, pushed out, or worst case, killed. You mentioned Iraq. It took them of the better part of 2 decades to get to a pretty decent place today, but Libya is still a mess and arguably in a worse place than it was when governed by its terrible dictator. So there's a lot of history yet to play out, but we'll see what happens. All the neighbors are obviously nervous. The Iraqis and the Jordanians are watching their borders very closely. And I think every authoritarian government in the region is now rethinking and being more cautious, from Tehran and Cairo to Manama and Riyadh.
So, Douglas, Syria has been embroiled in this civil war for more than a decade. So what was the tipping point all of a sudden?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't think we know. And I think a lot of people will be looking at a lot of leaders all over the world will be looking at their intelligence services and saying, how did you miss this? What was happening? I don't think any of us know, even the Syria experts, the people who watch this in the day-to-day, were obviously taken off guard by how quickly this all unfolded. So I think there'll be a lot of retrospective, trying to figure out exactly what happened. Was it some qualitative advantage on the part of the rebels? Was the regime always weaker than we thought? Is this about Iranians and the Russians having obviously other issues that they have to deal with, or some combination of all the above? There'll be a lot of postmortems, and I'm sure over at the CIA, everyone is trying to figure out what they missed.
Eamon, talk to us more about what's at stake for the U.S. in this moment. We know there are some 900 U.S. service members in the region right now. Are they more vulnerable?
Not necessarily, because the HTS have made very clear they do not have an issue with the United States. I think their immediate concern in the short term is safety and security for the Syrian people. Basic services, food, medicine, just getting the country back up and running after years of civil war. And for them, in some ways, the United States here has mutual aligned interests, which is the United States wants to make sure that Syria does not fall into the control of ISIS and other more extremist groups. And that is something that would indirectly and directly benefit HTS and the new Syrian transitional government, because they do not want to have a terrorist organization operating within their borders. But to your point as well, the U.S. has very important interests across the region. 3 of America's closest allies, Jordan, Israel, and Iraq, are now going to be directly impacted by, and Lebanon as well, directly by what happens in Syria over the next several weeks and months. And that is going to be important for the United States as it goes through its own transition with a new incoming administration. And, you know, to put a finer point on it, President-elect Trump had said that the U.S. should not get involved, but he'd actually sent that tweet out before Bashar al-Assad had collapsed. So it's incredible how everything is changing so quickly. I suspect that with the new incoming administration, they will reassess that position of not wanting to get involved. The question is, how directly will the Trump administration be involved in Syria?